One thing I picked up was that Golan said, if you invest, you study, you prepare, you will certainly, Bez Hashem, get a job. And then he said, you got a job through a miracle. And I think they're both true. This is what I said before also. You invest, you will see, the Eibishter will help you make a kelim for parnasa. You invest, you do what you have to. There's always a little miracle that gets you to where you are. So, if I can sum up a little bit, we have Yisrael, which you would say you're a self-starter, self-taught, right? Mendel, who's self-taught, but then decided to go to some condensed, intense schooling, which I do want to ask you a follow-up what you think about it. Levi, also self-taught with a very heavy or exclusive focus on security in a way. Not exclusive, but a heavy focus on security. Golan, who you described a very varied experience based on where you are and what you've seen and what you've experienced. What I want to do for the next, till around 8:30, is ask my own questions. And afterwards, we'll open it up till around 9 o'clock. Hopefully you'll have a lot of questions, and hopefully, and we're back. So, my list of prepared questions, again, this is what I imagine you want to learn. If I'm wrong, you'll have your chance to ask your own questions. The first question I want to pose, and this is for everybody, and I have some questions I have targeted. This question is really for everybody. I'm sitting here, and actually somebody asked me this Friday night for his son. Is tech still a good field? Should I advise him to get in? So my question to each one of you, and whoever wants to pick it up first, should I get into tech? Is it a good field? Is it a good parnasa? Lady, you want to start?
So I would encourage people to get involved in technology. You get to use your head, which is a good thing. Baruch Hashem, the field is quite competitive, but you have to make sure that you choose the right field in technology, because things that they want to outsource, they will outsource, and you can ask anyone employed by Amazon about that.
So one of my follow-up questions was outsourcing concerns, and I have your name down there.
So
So is it a good field, or are we all going to have, all the jobs going to the Far East or to the
there are certain things that will never be outsourced. That's one of the big reasons I chose security. But even when you outsource to another country, one of the things that they're starting to realize is that the politics and the attitudes of that nation make its way into your programs, into your software, which is developed and used by people here in the U.S. And in a sense, they're pulling some of the stuff back from India and the Far East. But if you can be commoditized, then you're going to be outsourced. If you cannot be, then you won't be outsourced. That's what I've seen. Golan probably has way more insight into this.
Do I think it's a good field? I mean, unfortunately, I'm not in any other field, so it's kind of hard to compare and contrast. That's true. Well, I mean, look, technology has made its inroads everywhere, and that's really the case. There isn't any subject today that doesn't in some way intertwine with technology, right? And on the other hand, we've identified here. Well, let me take it back a step. So 15 years ago, you could go into networking and you would find a job, but the bubble had burst. And I think that now combining certain skills together is an advantage. So here, I'm talking about security and networking, or security and coding, right? So it's not enough to just do one thing now. You've got to kind of find a way to be non-commoditized. Security is an area that people are really not willing not willing to outsource. And so, whereas if today we try to teach people a pure networking job, they might have a hard time. The other thing I want to say is, though, that there's been some disruption in the industry. So aside from the need to really approach technology from the perspective of security and privacy, software has made its inroads into everything. So whereas in the past, networking was about building big pipes and connecting them together, now everything is really being driven by software. So software-defined networks, as an example. I don't know if you guys are aware of what companies like Amazon and Microsoft and Google are doing now, but the reality is that software is defining everything. So we're no longer really worried about the infrastructure behind things, the plumbing behind it. What the industry has done is they've taken that responsibility onto themselves, and they're basically presenting an environment where you can just code and focus on the software itself, the application itself, without having to worry about all the infrastructure. So someone who goes, into a role where they think they're just going to build infrastructure, well, they may very well land a job at one of the big three, or for again, Amazon or Google or Microsoft or Facebook. But that kind of limits you to them. But if, on the other hand, you really do learn coding, which I think is key, irrespective of what subdivision you want to go into, then you kind of future-proof yourself. And there's no end to it. I mean, I think that really we're just at the beginning of this, that there isn't an end in sight. And irrespective of what specific field you want to go into, could be genetics. The reality is that there will be some component of that that's going to require, an emphasis and understanding of the science and the computer science behind it.
So actually, let's shift the straw. If I'm here, can you give me an overview of subfields in technology from your point of view, right? I myself, for example, I'm in software. I'm not 100% sure what networking actually is. I always imagine it's not building on Troy and Carol. I walk by there very often on the way to work, on the way home from work, and usually on the bus on the way to work. So just a little overview, so someone can think to themselves, okay, where do I have an interest? When I was going to school, I was thinking databases, because it sounded cool. I didn't actually go into database more than the person around me at work, but we do a lot of databases, so something like that.
Here are some of the fields that I came across and that I'm familiar with. There are probably hundreds more that I'm not even aware of, and I'm afraid networking is one of them. I'm not sure what it's about exactly, so sorry about that specific one. Okay, let's see. I mean, in programming itself, and by the way, it's very true what he said about if you know any programming. The truth is, programming a computer is programming a computer, and there are many different fields you can go into with that, and there are many different programming languages you can go to with that. But I myself started off learning C++. Well, no. Before that, when I was 11, 12, I started off learning BASIC, and eventually I applied those same concepts that I was already familiar with, and I learned C++. And eventually, when I was hired and I had to program in Java, it was literally just a few weeks of Googling around, how do you do this thing of C++ in Java? How do you do this other thing of C++ in Java? Picked it up real quickly. After that, I went to work for Getzler Washkin and Journeyman Web. How do you do these same concepts in JavaScript and in PHP? And once you know programming generally, you're already the powerful programmer that could really technically bring that to any other place you need to fit in and apply those same concepts. Because a computer is a computer, and you instruct it to do things, and it's just a matter of how do you specifically, the specific syntax for doing it in this environment or in that language or whatever it is. So having said that, the programming knowledge that I have, I've managed to apply in the field that we call front end, which Mendel Kramer apparently specializes in, which is making the front end, so to speak, meaning the public side of a website, the side that people actually go and visit and interact with. That's the page that you see on the browser, and that's the experience that you have clicking buttons and submitting forms and seeing animations on a web page. That's all called, the graphical layout, the design. That's all the front end, so people specialize in that. That's a whole field in and of itself. Plenty of work and Parnassa to achieve over there, making things better, revamping the whole website. People need to add this feature, that feature. People want to change it to have a better design. There's plenty of stuff going on in there. That's the front end. Then there's the back end, which is when the guy clicks the button. So, the front end stuff that's in your browser is one thing that the user is interacting with, but then the messages, the data goes over the internet to the server somewhere on the internet, and magic happens. A transaction happens in a bank, account gets created, a purchase order gets placed, and all that needs to be programmed, and the data needs to be saved in the database. So there are back-end programmers. That's something that I specialize a little bit more in. I have a bit more of a geschmack in that. It's strange because I'm thinking back to when I was young and I was looking at these boring sheets of data on the computer, and I thought, when I grow up, I'm never going to be interested in any of that. That looks terribly boring. And now I'm very, very much interested and enjoy it thoroughly. So there is the back-end side of making sure the program on the server works and does what it's supposed to do without any bugs and without any open holes of security that people can do things you didn't intend to do and break the system. There is databases, that itself is its own field of its own. And just to mention quickly a few others, for example, there's app development, making something that people can use on their mobile device these days is extremely important. That's another field. Another field could be, game development. That's an interesting field to appeal to people that want either a casual quick game on a mobile device or a full-fledged nice game on a computer. There's the educational fields. You can create either facilitating software that enables teachers to connect with students over the internet, to curriculum tutorial software, to all sorts of different things in the educational field. I mean, what else? What other areas do we have? I mean, that's just some that come off the top of my head.
I'm sure if there are any questions, maybe anything else. And I guess one more question for me, maybe two, because I do have like one big question that I really am itching to ask. But before I ask the big question, I want to ask Mendel, I hope this is a little controversial. If I come to you and I ask you, how do I start? Would you say go to a school? Would you say don't go to a school? But I have a follow-up as well. And that is, how do I stay relevant? Because everybody's afraid of Chas v'Shalom of being, we spoke about outsourcing, but like, how do I stay relevant? So how do I get in? How do I stay relevant?
Okay, so I don't know which ones I don't think those two questions are necessarily related, but getting started, at least, I mean, for me, I did enjoy learning it on my own, but I was not self-disciplined enough to spend the required amount of time to get good enough to get a job at at any qualified position as a programmer. So, but there are plenty that do have that that ability. So I would say if you have that ability and it's going well for you, I don't think it's required to go to any type of schooling. That is like the amazing thing about programming. Like you all you need is like a book, and you can go through 3 books and be absolutely ready to get a job as a developer. But if you are like me and you're struggling, it doesn't have to be that way. You can there are these like programs. They don't have to be boot camps. You can go to meetups. You can a good place to start is at the meetup over here. When we meet. Then there's also you can do a regular 4-year course, if you want to learn the actual more theoretical part of computer science. So those are all good places to start. I think it really depends on the person himself. As to staying relevant, so I don't necessarily struggle with that because there's a popular blog called Coding Horror, which complains about a MagPi developer. Developers have a sickness where they're like these birds that collect shiny stuff. We like to always instead of focusing on the work we need to do, we look at try doing the coolest thing, and so that's just doing that will make you stay relevant. Now, how much time should you spend on staying relevant? That's a good question. It's a point of contention between me and my employer.
Okay, thank you. All right, so since in the interest of turning it over to everybody here, I have a question for Roland. It's a question of salary. I don't know how much you want to say, but I'm sure everybody wants to know how much money can you make in this field. You're making a Caleb Panos, you're investing in something, you're getting involved. Maybe you want to contrast with other fields, maybe not, but what is your sense as somebody who has experience with something like that?
Okay, so in terms of comparing and contrasting, I think it's important to look at how much schooling you have to go through, traditionally to get a job. And I think that this particular field is most certainly an exception unless you want to go into underwater sea welding, which is dangerous, but pays well. I think that most Americans go through about $250,000 worth of schooling, and then spend the next 30, 40, 50 years paying it off. And that's entirely unnecessary. So if you were to ask me what someone should do at this point if they wanted to break into the field, I wouldn't encourage them necessarily to go into college, go through the normal college route. I think there's a lot of information that's taught there that is entirely irrelevant and is actually distracting. We feel pretty confident that an individual who has gone through yeshiva and has learned to learn, meaning has gained the analytical skills, through yeshiva can then go and focus on a field and in 2 years or 3 years accomplish what you know, an average American might take 5-6 years to do. And if you can get somehow looped in or tied into the industry, either through mentorships or internships, or you know, get accepted into a job in connection with you know, some educational institution, then I think that, you know, they can accomplish a lot more quickly. And you know, you asked me a very specific question, so let me be as specific as I can. It's not uncommon for people right out of school in this field to get offered jobs, you know, just under 6 figures. You know, that means anywhere between $75,000 to $90,000 right out of school. Okay, and again, it's partially inflated because there's so few people in it. But someone who's had 5-6 years of experience today can easily get a job that pays very well. You know, I mentioned that one particular company was telling me that total cost of ownership, you know, for an employee is $350,000 a year. I mean, you're not going to get that kind of a job out of the gate, but if you add base salary and bonus and equity, you know, and 5-6 years in the business, that's kind of where things are. You know, again, I believe it's a little bit artificially inflated because there's so few people out there. You know, it's really the case that what ends up happening is that because there's a limited number of people, they steal from each other. So Google will steal from Facebook, who will steal from Microsoft, who will steal from Amazon, and what happens is people just accept one role after another, and that's the reason that it is at that high. But if I were to take a look at what the non-inflated cost would be, I still think it's a 6-figure salary. So it's a good field to be in. I mean, it's very hard to find a field that you know, that pays as well as it does for as little schooling, you know, is necessary. But again, I think one of the key things here is discipline, and it's very hard for people to gain discipline on their own. And although I didn't in any way follow a traditional route, it's almost ironic for me to say that, you know, you should try and go through some traditional schooling. But I'm not saying it should be traditional. I think that there are some opportunities to cut through the noise, and you know, we're obviously starting small. I mean, we're going to be probably only targeting about 40 people, but the intention is to scale this, and to scale it not just here in Brooklyn, but in Boston and in Palo Alto and in Israel. So I think if we can prove the model and prove that it works, there'll be opportunities for people to compete with us. And to take our model. I mean, we're not trying to hide it. We're trying to make it successful and share it. So, you know, if you are, on the other hand, someone of discipline, then take a book and start learning. You know, but that's the story.
Is there a specific age group that this IDT Yeshiva program?
Yeah. So we need to be careful that we're not offering something that's so exciting that people drop yeshiva. Again, I want to be clear that I really do believe that what's learned in yeshiva is a prerequisite for what we do. So if you talk to me about a target age group, I would say post-yeshiva. And it's not just true for men, by the way. I think that this is something that we very much want to open to women. And if you take a look at who's who at our company, I mean, the vast majority are actually women. So, you know, both are true. You know, we don't want to take away from yeshiva. So, you know, post-yeshiva.
What's opening in September is for men only?
In person for men only. I think that, you know, one of the problems that, you know, that the women in our community face is trying to show up somewhere when they've got a family to raise and children at home. So we believe that we will have an online component for women. I don't believe that men are very successful in online schools. You know, we get distracted easily by whatever, so we kind of need to come together in a place. So the place will be for men. I think cyberspace will be the place for women. But that's still to be determined.
Speaking, who's asking? Well, please ask. I think there's some rule that when people finish speaking and say any questions, nobody's going to ask a question for a certain amount of seconds. So if the speaker looks around 10 seconds, oh, no questions, thank you, goodbye. People do have questions. So we can wait 60 seconds and then ask your questions.
Whenever that happened to me, and I said, okay, no one understood, I'll start the presentation again. I had questions for 60 minutes.
That was a good move because people do have questions. So, Let's start with the back, we'll work maybe our way forward.
So I just want to make just two general statements, just to tie in the conversation there about developers and offshoring, etc. It turns out that actually Salesforce invited all the IBM staff that lost their positions to submit their resumes. So he made a public announcement about it. So the truth is, as everybody's been saying, there's somewhat security in the development world right now. And as we've seen from many Lubavitchers who have any knack within the development area, not necessarily do they have a schooling background or the education to support it, but because they have it, they're picked up and they move in. As well as I wanted to mention, because you guys are all talking about development, but if you don't necessarily have a feel for the actual development, for the engineering part of it, there's the business part of it, and that's the project management, product management, administration. If you're doing front-end development, there's someone who's got to design it, wireframe it, make sure it happens, implementation. So not necessarily you're doing a hands-on coding, you may get onto the coding and say, wait a second, this is way too complicated for me, I have no interest in this, it's extremely boring. But you may be the creative type and decide, let me wireframe this, let me build a design, but let me work this out in Photoshop, I'm very creative. And that's how potentially you can segue into doing like graphic design into a technical / business role. So there's also those opportunities for those here, and that's very wide-ranging. In terms of networking and IT infrastructure, it's talking about plugging things in together to make sure when you turn on the switches, all the computers talk to each other. So there's a business side and a development side to that as well.
Right, you saw, for example, your company, do you guys advertise or people find you? Just let me know, you have a sales force.
Currently, even just by word of mouth, we're overbooked and we're looking for more people to so that we can take on more jobs. And sometimes you have to turn down clients and say, sorry, we're totally full and busy these months. You know, Baruch Hashem, there's a lot of people trying to make a website for their business, or they need a one-page thing for a project, and it keeps coming. Baruch Hashem. Some of them are bigger and longer term. They want a whole system built and they need to maintain it. Some people have a one day this, one day that thing. Baruch Hashem, there's a lot of, even just word of mouth as it is, we're Baruch Hashem surviving.
Hey, can I do a shameless plug? Because some others did, if you don't mind. I represent Chabad.org. We're hiring all the time, so we need the product development support. We also need developers, but in terms of solutions and product development, certainly. So,
Do you want to say people should reach out to you?
yeah, so that's an important part. Mendy exactly. So certainly, there we go.
All right, let's move over row. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is mainly to Golan, because you seem to be the most, experienced. How important is math and science in programming in general? Besides for, learning, how language works and the logic of programming languages, how much is the science and math elements?
Okay, so when you talk about math and science, it's important to bifurcate theory and practice. Okay, there's certainly a lot of math and science which is completely theory. It's good to learn because it kind of sharpens your mind, but I don't think that us as a community necessarily needs that, because we've already been through the sharpening of the mind through analytical analysis of Talmud study and so on. But yet on the other hand, there is the practical side of the math and science, which I think is important. And that could just be, general understanding of how things work. You don't have to know how everything works. I mean, amazingly, most adults have no idea how glass is made or how the car runs, but we still drink out of the glass. We still drive a car. It's not necessary that you know all of the bits and bytes, but on the other hand, if you take a look at companies like Google, even the people that install the TVs in the theaters, okay, they require that they understand, a certain level of the math and science, or the STEM as we call it. And it's partially because it trains the mind, but it's also because it's good to have a general understanding of what's happening. You don't need to know calculus, okay, for example, to get a coding job. But if you do, it's helpful. I think that there are some prerequisites, and certainly algebra, I think would be an absolute minimum. Knowing geometry would be a minimum, but this is high school level stuff, okay? And
Beers, talking about that.
Yeah, I don't think that someone who's been exposed to none of it will have to take more than you know, 6 months or more, you know, to kind of learn the prerequisites to go into, you know, the field and start applying it. And they don't have to get overweight either. Okay, these things can happen simultaneously.
If I may interject to that, in my experience and opinion, I got away with even without any at all education in any math and any science. And it might be that as a result of that, I'm not the best developer and programmer that there can be. But at least I can tell you, I can testify to you that I got away with it, and you can. It's extremely helpful. At least 20-30% of the time, you could be making much better, much more optimized, better working, in many ways, just overall better solutions if you just knew some math tricks and if you understood thoroughly how the, you know, even the bits and bytes and then the science behind that works. But a lot of that you kind of get the hang of as you go along. You could figure them out. You read a little article here and there about it. You watch a little YouTube clip explaining to you about it, and you kind of hop along, not having officially learned through it, but kind of knowing just about enough. Again, like you said with the Gemara Cup, you can get away with not. But again, there's a lot of important advantage to be had if you do go and learn all that, you know, like you said, 6 months of at least basic algebra and etc. There's definitely advantages, but you can get away without it.
Before we go to the next question, like I said myself, of working where I worked for 15 years, seeing the people around me, I learn what I don't know. You know, I go, oh wow, these guys, they went through a more rigorous training. You don't admit that you don't know it. You just try to beef up on it. And, you know, Baruch Hashem, just back to you in the back.
What would you recommend if someone has somewhat a knack for coding or programming just by playing around to actually learn a language? What would you recommend to jump into in terms of career, in terms of, you know, easy way of jumping into the industry?
Can I turn that one to Lady? We've had similar discussions.
Sure. So, what I found to be really helpful is to take a project, a small project, and just build it. Some people find it helpful to go through a set of challenges over the internet, but I find it always really helpful to build something. And then as you build on that, you learn how to build it better. You learn some of the underlying technologies around that. You learn how to tweak it. And
Which language should we use?
so which one? In which case?
When I'm
did it
starting to
originally-
build it, when I'm starting to build it, which one?
I would recommend maybe if you have a particular interest in something specific, like if websites interest you, or if an app interests you, or if a website interests you, decide to build a little app or a little website, and then learn those languages necessary for that thing.
Is there one language I'm
The
looking at?
language is a means
Suggest?
to an end. It's a means to an end. That said, avoid C. And probably avoid all the lists.
Well, what language
And
would you
also
say?
functionalize.
Maybe if I press you, which I am.
Which language would I
would
say
you
is
suggest
great
to
to
him right
start?
now?
Python.
You got an answer.
I told you
That's
I said you should
So Python over JavaScript.
Oh yeah.
I would disagree with that.
Python over JavaScript. Can you clarify why?
So I'll clarify why, and I'll go back.
What do you guys use?
I'll go back to what Mendel Kramer said. You know, how do we stay relevant? So this is a problem that obviously consumes all employees. And the way I try to stay relevant is to try to go to the industries that don't move a lot. So stay very far away from front end, because every single day they're coming out with something new. And then the old is now the deprecated, and you just look at how many frameworks you've got. Angular 1, which is in one way, Angular 2 completely different. You have to rewrite your entire code base. But then that's not popular anymore, so now it's React and React Native, and then next year it'll be something else. And it's not React with Gulp, it's now React with Webpack. But if all these things don't make sense to you, trust me, they don't make sense to me either. I just have to read them and say I'm staying away from
This
this.
is like a personal attack on Harry.
Mendel Kramer in defense of front end.
Excuse me, Madam Secretary. No, I think actually JavaScript is a great language to if you're a complete beginner, simply because ignore all the hype around JavaScript that there is today. You can safely ignore that. JavaScript as a language is a tiny, tiny language. I actually, the first real programming language I learned was Ruby, and at the time I thought that was like simply the best language to learn with. I still think it's a great language to program in, but I actually today think that JavaScript is better to learn in, because it's simply, there's less magic, it's a smaller scope, You can even stick away from like the newer mapping stuff and just do like, you know, simple for loops, very simple constructs that exist in every language, and you can move on from there to many other things on ES6 or to Python or any other.
But there's no typing, so there's like some fundamental concepts, like
Python also doesn't have typing, so
Well-
you're going into different, first of all, you can type TypeScript, but you're going into different,
Once
you
you
know,
once you know JavaScript, you can do Node. You can do a
Right,
lot of
yeah, Node is the bane of my existence. And whenever I see a Node app, I go, okay, let's have fun. So precisely around what Mendel said, so JavaScript is a small language that engineers have piled tons of stuff on top of. And it's when you come to a job, no one's gonna ask you, straight up JavaScript, they'll ask you, JavaScript with X library. I think one of the only places they go straight up JavaScript is at Google, and you really, really have to know JavaScript. In fact, if you're not reading the code of V8 or SpiderMonkey, then you're probably not in the know at that point. That said, I personally avoid JavaScript. I go with TypeScript, which is I push the problem to Microsoft and say, you guys deal with the latest stuff. I'm going to write in one language that doesn't move. But when it comes to building applications and building something that you can have your hands on, something that you can feel proud of, something that you have as an accomplishment, something like Python is really easy to get started with. Works on every operating system that you're going to be using, and the code is very simple and straightforward. It teaches you a lot of basic concepts. In most computer science departments, this is the main language that they use. The language is a means to an end, so if you spend a lot of time learning about the intricacies of the language, you're going to really lose focus on the product that you're trying to build. So I heavily recommend Python.
Before we go to the next question, I don't know if you guys are aware, there was an article published by Bloomberg this year, or last year? I advise everybody to spend the 3 hours to read the 90 pages of the article online. That article, I think, will help you greatly. It goes through, from the beginning of time of coding till today, goes through all the various languages, all the different life cycles, and it will give you a great insight to whether you like this field or not. The article is called, I forgot what it's called, something, The History of Code or something like that, but you can't miss it. You go, written by a guy named, I think, Paul Ford, on Bloomberg.com, Google it. I really strongly advise everybody to spend the several hours necessary to read that article. Next questions, please.
So I just want to touch on the as far as like the length that you stay at a particular job. I know we had Golan that stayed at with his first, I guess your first real job for 21 years, and Levy who jumped around, who like sounds like 3-4 different places. So what are the advantages of staying in one place? And I mean, obviously each case is different, but just if you could speak to the advantages that you see in staying in one place, and then maybe Levy could speak about why he felt that he had to move
Just
around.
a point of clarity I want to make. IAG wasn't the first job, but it also wasn't the last. We've created 10 new businesses a year, so one of the reasons that I stayed for so long was because it kept changing. For me, the real reason that I stayed was not just because it was comfortable. It wasn't always comfortable. We had our ups and downs. We had layoffs. We were exposed to all of the worst things that could ever happen, to a company. But if I were to advise someone, I would tell them, you really should make sure to stay relevant. And staying relevant means that you're not comfortable, that you are always putting yourself out a little bit, out of your comfort zone, learning something that is new to you. If you're stuck in a job and you've stopped learning, that's bad. So wherever you go, you should make sure that every so often you're learning some new skills and some new capabilities.
So when I would generally leave, so when I left my development job, it's primarily because I wanted to focus on security. And consulting is a runway. No one stays in consulting for long; it can burn you out very fast because the ramp up and ramp down times happen on a weekly basis. So in general, you're doing a project at a company, you have a steady flow of work in consulting. It's like large waves. So stayed in consulting for about 2.5 years, and then was recruited out to a company called Genesis, which was out of California. Genesis, I worked remotely, but when half my team left, then I figured, okay, it's probably better to work locally. And then pretty much at the same point, Squarespace called me up. So, the only reason the only reason I left my development job was to move careers, and the reason I left my security job at Genesis was because the team left and I wanted to work locally. Otherwise, it's staying focused, as Galan mentioned. You also always want to be learning. So I teach myself a lot of stuff. I've always been teaching myself things. So like regardless of where I am, I'm always going to be learning stuff. But a lot of people need other people in the company to teach them things, and that is also can be one of the focuses in moving jobs.
Okay, that was actually one person I wanted to ask about moving jobs. I had somebody where I work. I remember that he didn't get the raise he wanted. He left the company. He went to Bear Stearns, so that didn't work out very good. But I think he came back later and I asked him, why did you move? Our company is so big, you could move around in the company. And I didn't want to wait another year for my next review to get that raise, so he moved. Personally, I'm somebody who hasn't moved in 15 years. And I think it also depends a lot on your personality. Whether you like to move around, a little more risk taker, or you like to be more settled. So I think it depends a lot on your personality. You know, pluses and minuses, or, you know, pros and cons. All right, there's a question.
Yeah, so you're speaking a little bit about you talking about the salaries or something. When someone comes out of school, what they can earn. But what's considered coming out of school? And also, I think a lot of these jobs, if I'm not mistaken, they require you to have a certain amount of years of experience. It's like 1 year experience minimum or 2 years experience. So what's experience and what's learning and what do they consider as experience? What can you do, let's say, to gain experience that you can actually show for yourself? Because if you don't get a degree, how do you get some kind of an accredited way to do it? And also for yourself when you're learning, maybe this is another question, how can you really know that you know your stuff, you know, to such a degree that you can confident to try to go through that?
I don't know if any of my colleagues want to comment, but I largely see it, you know, in 3 areas. First of all, there's no question that work experience is key. Okay. There's also no question that the people that come with work experience plus a degree can generally make a little bit more, but you know, more often than anything else, it's work experience. So someone coming out of school, how can they land a job? Well, they really need to have a combination of both, and that's where internship helps. Internship gets your foot in the door, gets people to, it's almost like a shoulda. Do you want to work there, or do they want to employ you? So I think throughout, you know, the process of education, and by the way, that education continues. It doesn't stop at the moment you leave a coding school or something similar to what we're doing. It's an ongoing thing. So it's always important to continue growing and learning. But I think that combination of bringing together, you know, education and internship and you know, finding a mentor that can kind of help navigate you, that's what makes it work. There was one other point I wanted to make, which right now I'm not remembering, but you know, the beginning is always a little more difficult. So if you don't start making a salary immediately, put yourself out there. I mean, I remember in the beginning, I took some ridiculous, you know, job. It paid almost nothing, but I was willing to do that in order to learn what the culture is like out in the real world, because it's not the same as the culture in a yeshiva. And in fact, just that experience alone is worth a lot. So, you know, it may be safer not to set an expectation of $60,000 to $100,000 your first year. It might be safer to set a lower expectation and just get yourself out there, but it will come as long as you're dedicated and you're willing to, you know, to take the time to go in.
Just a quick follow-up, if I'm looking for that internship, what should I do first?
So I'm gonna
Skip the internship.
I'm gonna
Don't
bump the internship. So in my field, which is application security, and then the related field, which would be engineering, it's actually quite easy to build experience without having ever gone to school or stepped into or worked on a job. It's called open source software. If you can find bugs in open source software, especially really popular ones, companies will give you a lot of money very fast. So right now, most major online companies have something called a bug bounty. You find a bug in their system, they'll cut you a couple $100, sometimes even $1,000. So when, in the application security field, if you've submitted vulnerabilities to popular open source projects, you're really big on bug bounties, you're getting hired. You're not getting hired as a junior, you're getting hired as a senior. Within the engineering field, if you contribute to open source software, and largely, not just in documentation, but also in code, bug fixes, etc., and especially the depth of that open source software, so if it's like operating systems like FreeBSD or Linux, or database systems like MySQL and Postgres, all these things are really, really, really bright indicators that you know how to work within a large software ecosystem, and that counts for years of experience over other people. So I would use that. That is what I used to kind of bump myself straight. I joined as a senior, and that's when I went to move fully into security. I used that to bump as well.
Question back here?
Hey, I think Golan had mentioned about one needs about 2-3 years of schooling. Can one be successful with 2-3 months of schooling and successful as in make close to 6 figures? And if yes, which schooling, which programs? And I have several other questions really quick.
Okay, well, first of all, there's no silver bullet here. I think anyone that expects to take 2 or 3 months of schooling and make 6 figures is probably gonna go into selling drugs or something. I mean, if you wanna do something illegal, you know, there's quick routes. I mean, I can tell you what to do, you know. But no, I mean, seriously speaking,
One semester somewhere.
yeah, I mean, you can, I don't know about 1 semester, but certainly 6 months to a year, you know, you could learn something that can land a job. You know, there are certifications, we heard some, like project management. There are, even within security, if you're like a finance guy, or if you like paper, I can't stand it, but if you like paper, you know, there's certainly a lot of that in the auditing world. You know, in security in particular, it's not just the hackers, okay? It's the people that organize the hackers, it's the people that manage the data. So really, depending on what your interests are, you may find that you already have the skills, you know, to apply yourself. So I think that it's important to kind of figure out, maybe even talk to headhunters about what's open and what's available. And you may find out that you're already skilled in a certain area, and you just need a little bit more of a bump, you know, to get your foot in the door. So,
Project management pay less than coders?
I mean, look, there are project managers that get paid a lot of money because they guide the coders in terms of, you know, producing a product. They're all relevant and important. It's kind of like saying what's more important, the hand or the foot, the mouth or the ear. All of these things come together, and really, you know, you have to do some exploration and figure out what you like to do. I think more important than anything else is enjoying what you do, because if you don't, you know, it's just going to be a painful process. So there's some discovery that you need to go through to figure out.
The reason why I asked that, could you mention?
Yes, the official.
Just if I can, this is not statistics, this is personal anecdotes, but 2 of them that refute those 2 points. I went to boot camp, it was 3 months. I don't advertise this as necessarily working for everybody, but it happened to work very well for me. I did get a job, not 6 figures, not even close, but I did get a job getting paid a lot more than I was getting paid before. After 3 months, that's first point, and I did move jobs from a startup, which is non-from, to a from company, and I did get a respectable salary.
We want
Anyways, that's all.
There's gonna be one quick last question, but we're gonna continue afterwards, so let's just do
Okay, just
last
one quick one. Going on some more to get with you. What is thought of the certifications given, let's say the Cisco JUIT or CCNA or the Junos? I mean, technically those can be done if you have enough time, a month or 2 years.
Yes, okay, so you're asking a very specific question with respect to networking. So, you know, we taught Cisco networking 15 years ago. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that someone do the traditional course, because Cisco, they largely created those courses so that you should go out and you know, ask for that product when you land your job. In other words, it was part of the marketing scheme, okay? That's not to say that what they were teaching was invalid, but what's happened is the whole industry has flipped. So it used to be that the network guys were like the ones that controlled everything. It turns out now the coders really are. And so there's this whole concept of DevOps and software-defined networking. None of that is taught by Cisco or Juniper. I would, maybe turn your attention to a more forward-thinking company like Arista Networks, which is really eating their lunch today. And get yourself into one of those courses, and I think you will future-proof yourself in terms of software-defined data centers and so on.
All right, let me do a quick wrap. A few things that are on my mind. I'm going to repeat that article. It's called What is Code by Bloomberg Businessweek. Invested 3 hours. Another thing that we didn't speak about, but you did mention it, and that is some people are more entrepreneurs, more in keeping with the original mission of the organization, I guess. And there are people who are non-coders who make great businesses out of contracting coding. And they hire the coders, and that's another angle. I want to plug. We have a group here in Crown Heights called our Nash Tech Meetup. Many of us are members. We meet about once every 6 weeks, actually, right here. And we want to thank everybody for that. And it's and nobody mentioned it, but it's obvious. Networking among us, among people, and especially here at Nash or wherever you are, is very helpful. You get ideas, you get leads. We heard nice leads here tonight. So if you're interested in that, approach me or Levi, and we'll get you hooked up. I also I think, Rabbi Werdy, if people later want to reach the panelists, maybe through you, they'll send you maybe an email and you'll forward it, something like that. We're going to ask the panelists to stick around for a few more minutes for what we call offline questions. And again, I want to thank Rabbi Werdy for hosting this event. As somebody who's been doing this for 15 years and a different number of years, I've always felt it's a great field. I've always felt it's a great field once I got involved in the field. But I do think now, 15 years later, it's a great field. And I think that's a great testament that you have to do it for a long time and you still hear somebody saying, I think it's a great field. If you ask me, should I go into this field in some form, I'll say yes. I want to wish you all that luck. I'm going to ask Rabbi Werdy now, our host, to come up and to close it out.